nature and God's story of how he went about that, of how he intervened in this broken world, in this sinful world, as we've even see in the news every day. The way God revealed his story to us is in his big story called the Bible. And that story of God's intervention, of his plan to work in our lives to save us from our sin, is told in stories in the big stories. So stories in the lives of people that God used to reveal his nature and who he is. And we're looking at God's story as told in the book of Esther. If you were with us last week, you will remember. If you weren't with us, here's your 10-second catch you up to speed. We learned that there was a man named King Xerxes who in 483 decided that he was going to show off his power and who he was, and he represents the world, the lusts of the eyes, the lust of the flesh. It's about riches. It's about sensual pleasure. It's all about making yourself feel good. It's all things that are superficial and shallow, and this is what he had and showed off. And then ultimately he tried to show off his wife to say, let me show you that my wife is hotter than your wife, and she's the most beautiful person in the kingdom. And he commanded her to come in to the throne room so that the princes and others could kind of ogle her and stare at her, kind of some eye candy. And Queen Vashti said, no, I'm not going to do that. And so the world, who thinks that it's inevitable and all-powerful, was defied by one woman. Well, that created chaos. So she is deposed. You cannot say no to the king and not suffer consequences. Now what does the king do? He doesn't have a queen, and his servants say, well, why don't we let's have a contest. Let's go throughout your kingdom. Your kingdom is vast. It covers land today that would be more than 20 countries in that area of the world, of India and all the stands, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, half of Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Israel. All of this was the kingdom of Xerxes. And they said, let's go throughout the kingdom. We will find the most beautiful young virgins that we can find, because they can't have been married. They can't have been with anybody else. It's only got to be with the king, and we'll have a contest. And that's where we pick up our story today, God's story as told in the book of Esther. This morning we're going to be looking at Esther chapter 2, beginning at verse 5 through chapter 23. One of the uniquenesses of our story is that we are never going to hear God's name pronounced or told by our storyteller. But as we're going to begin to discover, God is everywhere. God is in every aspect of history. God is in every aspect of his creation. And we expect to see him show up in the book of Esther. And spoiler alert, he shows up immediately as our story begins this morning. In Esther chapter 2, verse 5, we read this. There just happened to be a man named Mordecai, a Jew who lived in Susa in the citadel. Just happened to live there, if you will. Well, what's significant about that? Well, we would read that, and as I told you, from time to time, I'm going to tell you some things that the original audience would instinctively know. When they read that there's a man named Mordecai who is a Jew, they are not thinking about where he is from. This is not a statement of his ethnicity. This is not a statement of his home country. This is not like saying, oh, there was Jonathan who was a German Norwegian. Okay, that's me, by the way. That doesn't tell you anything about who I am. It tells you where I'm from. But in the story of Esther, when it says, there just happened to be a man named Mordecai, a Jew who lived in Susa, in the citadel and the capital of the city. What it's telling you is not where he's from, but who he is with. In the rest of the story of Esther, which is God's story, when you see the word Jew, you should think in your mind, as the original audience did, oh, this man is a follower of God. This man is a follower of the God of Israel. This man is a descendant of Abraham. This man is one who is part of the covenant people who follows God's way. Why is that significant? We looked last week at Xerxes and the kingdom of Persia representing the world, representing the belief system, not this physical world, but the spiritual belief system that says everything that God says we are against. So when you are a follower of God, by that definition, you are opposed to the world. So what did we learn from the world? The world says, do what makes you feel good. Be as rich as you can. Indulge in the pleasures of the flesh. It's all about you. It's get while the getting's good. You only go around once in life. Reach for all the gusto you can get. You deserve the ego. Nobody else deserves. Everything is about you. God, to his followers, said, number one, it's not about you. Number one, it's about me. Number two, it's still not about you. Number two, it is about others. And you put me first, you put others second, so that they might come to see the God who loves them, that through your life, you might point them to me, who is bringing forgiveness and pardon and bringing them into relationship with me. So we have some conflict now in our story. We see someone who is in the world of Persia, and yet has a very different standard and value. Where the world says it's all about the outside, God says it's all about the inside. And so we have a man named Mordecai who is in the very capital. He's in the citadel. Remember, the citadel is a walled city, a walled fortress that was within the city of Susa. Everyone that lives in the citadel works for the government. We don't know what Mordecai's job is, but we know he is what we would call today a civil servant. So we have a civil servant who happens to be a follower of God living within the city, within the kingdom of Xerxes. He observes all that has gone on, all the feasting, all the debauchery, and all that. We learn further that he is a descendant of Kish, and who is a descendant of Benjamin. Benjamin is one of the 12 sons, is one of the 12 tribes. So we are told again, in case we missed it, that he's part of this covenant family of God. But the interesting thing is, Kish is the father of King Saul. And so Mordecai is a direct descendant of the first king of Israel. I think that's significant. Let's see if it plays a part, coincidentally, in where our story is going. So, we're having a beauty pageant. There happens to be a man in the kingdom who is a follower of God. His name is Mordecai. And it just so happens that he has a cousin, it just so happens, coincidentally, that he has a cousin named Hadassah / Esther. That's interesting. Hadassah is actually her real name. Hadassah is her Hebrew name. That is her Jewish name, if you will. That is her follower of God name. That is the name that was given to her by her parents. But in the story, from here on out, we are going to refer to her as Esther, which is her pagan name, which is her Persian name. Why is that significant? Well, the original audience would have understood, which maybe some of you understand, that in these ancient times, when one kingdom would conquer another kingdom, what they liked to do was kill the adults, kill the old people, and take the children into slavery, take them into bondage, because children are more malleable, and children are more trainable. The younger you get them, the more hopefully you can get them to reject their values, get to reject their custom and their culture that they were born with, and get them to accept yours. And one of the ways you do that is try to erase any trace of their background. So Hadassah is renamed Esther. We see this all throughout God's story. We see it with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the young boys who were taken into captivity. Not their real names. That's their pagan names. And so we see, again, some conflict, don't we? We see God, the followers of God, the people of God, and we see the world trying to erase any trace or any background of God. So Mordecai, who just happens to live in Susa, coincidentally, wink, wink, happens to have a daughter who's not really his daughter. It's actually his uncle's daughter. His uncle has passed away. His wife has passed away. And so Esther is an orphan. Mordecai, being her cousin, but quite a bit older than her, takes her into his home and raises her as if she's his own daughter. It just so happens that Esther is gorgeous. She not only has a great body, the scripture tells us, but she's beautiful. She's the full package. Guys would say she's a 10. She's a 10 plus. So we're not surprised to learn rather quickly who gets scooped up in the beauty pageant. Who gets scooped up in the contest? Esther, who just happens to be a follower of God, coincidentally, gets caught up in this beauty pageant contest, the daughter or the cousin of Mordecai. We don't know how long it took in the kingdom, but the people went throughout the kingdom and found all of these all of these beautiful women, these young virgins that were stunning and gorgeous, and brought them into Susa, into the citadel, where they were put under the care of a eunuch named Haggai. Haggai is in charge of all the virgins. He's in charge of all the women that are going to be entered into the beauty pageant, and they live in a place in the castle, and it's called the harem. It's the place in the castle, in the citadel, where they all live, and he is in charge of them. As we saw last week, he's a eunuch. The reason he's a eunuch is that he was castrated when he was a small boy. That's what makes a young boy a eunuch. And the conquering people would do this for two reasons: to keep them docile and that they could trust them around the women. So there's no other man around all these young, beautiful girls other than a eunuch who doesn't care about them anyway and doing his job. But we learn something really interesting. Esther isn't just stunning. She's not just a pretty face. She's actually quite nice. She actually has a personality. She really is the full package. She's so nice, she's so great that quickly she becomes the favorite of Haggai. And so because he's in charge of all the people in the beauty pageant, he has a lot of power about who gets what and how that works. So he raises her he gives her the best room. He gives her the best room in the harem. He gives her the best clothes. He gives her all the best things because she is pleasing and he really likes her. Now we learn something really fascinating here, that the Queen Vashti has been deposed. There's going to be a beauty pageant to get the new queen. And we would think, I wonder how this works. Well, we learn, quite fascinating, that it is 12 months. It is one full year of preparation before any of the beauty pageant contestants go before the king. 12 months. 6 months, half of the year, is working with oils like myrrh and other oils. In other words, it's about your skin. For 6 months, you're trained in how to take care of your skin to make it soft and supple and glow and to just be beautiful. For 6 months, they're training you on this. For the next 6 months, it's all about perfume. It's all about how to smell good and you see again, do we see the world here again? Think about how shallow this is. It's all about how you feel and how you look. This is not character training. This is not maturity. This is all about the visual. It's all about the shallow things because you've got to go in and you've got one night with the king And you better impress him. You better blow him away. You better look your best. You better act your best. I'm sure there was some do's and don'ts. I'm sure there was some cultural things like don't do this when you're in the presence of the king, or don't say that, or don't act this way. But it was all very shallow, because the whole point of this is you have one night with the king to try to get him to choose you out of all the other girls that are in this contest. And so we see in our story that the contest begins. We don't know how many girls they were. We don't know how often they were summoned to spend a night with the king, but we can tell from the timing of our story that there must have been quite a lot. Because we have 1 year of preparation before the first virgin goes to spend a night with the king. She spends a night with the king. To put it quite bluntly, they weren't playing checkers, or he wasn't asking about her family during the night. She had to impress the king, and he had to say, I choose you. Esther's turn comes up in our story. 4 years after Queen Vashti said no. 4 years after Queen Vashti said no, 1 year after a time of preparation, so even if the virgins began going in after 1 year, it's been 3 years after the contest started that Queen Esther, or Esther from our story, a little bit of spoiler alert there, Esther from our story, it's finally her turn, and she gets summoned in. Now, because she is a favorite of Haggai, one of the things that happens is when it was your turn to go before the king and try to impress him and hope that you would get selected to be the queen, you could take things with you. Maybe some seductive clothing, maybe some kinds of gifts or certain perfume, whatever you thought would help you win, that's what you would take with you. It's finally Esther's time to go in, and she says to Haggai, you tell me what to take. She goes, I'll just take whatever you say. We don't know what that is, but she just took whatever he said to take. Queen Esther goes in. She spends the night with the king, and the next morning, King Xerxes, notorious womanizer, not a good guy, says, you win. You win. We are going to put the crown on Esther's head. If you weren't with us last week, please understand, don't make this romantic. Don't make this something more than it was. Esther was no more of an object than his army, than his castle, than his gold cups. This was not a partner. This was not a marriage where there's a partnership. This is not a marriage of equals. She is one other possession, one other object of all the rest of the things that he owns. But out of all those who went with him, Queen Esther wins. The others who did not win, and Queen Esther herself, go into a second harem. We learned that within the citadel, there's the first harem, or the first gathering of all the king's women, who are all the virgins who have never spent a night with the king. That's one harem. The second harem is the harems of the concubines. That's kind of a weird word for us. But concubine literally means someone who's no longer a virgin because they spent a night with the king. So now we have two harems in the castle, the harem of the virgins and the harem of the concubines. I want you to understand something historically that the original audience would have understood. Don't romanticize this. Ladies, this is not a fairy tale story. You get to be a princess and, you get to live in the castle and you're weighted on hand and foot and it's all so wonderful. Understand, to be a concubine or to be part of a harem in the king's castle meant several things. Number one, you were never going to be married. Unless you were the one that was chosen, you would never be married. You would never have a husband, you would never have children, you would never have a family. In fact, for many of the girls, for most of the girls that went in and lost, that was the end of their life ever. They, in the sense of any relationship with a man or anything like that. Because you would think, well, why couldn't the losers Why couldn't they be free to go? Why couldn't they go and have another life and things like that? The king didn't want him. Oh, no, you don't understand. Once the king has had you, no one else gets to have you. You don't get to marry somebody else, and then the guy can go, you know what? She was once, but no. So it's not a glamorous life. Maybe occasionally from time to time, some of the concubines are summoned before the king, but most of them just lived a life, if you want to say, in isolation in the palace until the day they died. No husband, no family, no nothing. They're also tended by the eunuchs. The eunuchs, as we mentioned, were young boys who were taken in captivity, who were castrated when they were young so that they would not develop, would not mature, so that they would be more docile and could be controlled. We need to understand in this Medo-Persia culture of the day, historians tell us that King Xerxes took 500 young boys every year from those territories that he had conquered. 500 young small boys, think 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. 500 a year were conscripted to come to the citadel to come. They were castrated. They were made eunuchs. And for the rest of their life, no family, no wife. You are a slave who serves in the city, who serves in the civil servant, who serves the kingdom of God. So we can decide which one had the worst lot, but neither one was good. Your life was basically over if you were one of those two, chosen to be part of that beauty pageant or chosen to be a eunuch in the kingdom of Xerxes. The world does not care about the individual. Can you see that? This is horrific when we hear about the concubines. This is horrific when we hear about the eunuchs. The world does not care about your happiness. The world does not care about your individual hopes and dreams. What the world cares about is what the world wants. Do you understand? We would say today, these young boys and girls were simply pawns. They were simply pawns in what King Xerxes wanted. They were pawns in what his world system wanted to live. The world is a horrific place. The world talks about loving the individual, or the world talks about we're the ones who really care about you, but the truth of the matter is the world only cares about the world, and the world only cares about the collective, and it leaves many damaged lives in its wake. Is that still happening today? Yeah, I think we see that happening in the world today. So Esther wins, and she becomes Queen Esther. We see in verse 17 of chapter 2. This is where we see that it's year 4 after Queen Vashti was deposed, and it says there that King Xerxes loved Esther more than all the other women. Now, we have a language problem here because we don't know the original language of the book. So I want to explain to you what our original audience would have instinctively understood when they saw the word that was loved here. The word that is used for love in this verse is a word that should be translated desired. It is this. I want you to understand, King Xerxes did not turn into some romantic. He did not turn into someone who said, you know what, I've been a womanizer and jerk all my life. Esther is my equal. She's amazing. We're going to be partners in this case. No, it is the same word that is used for Ammon, who raped his half-sister Tamar. They were half-siblings of King David, and in 2 Kings chapter 13, verse 1, the same word is used when it says Ammon loved his half-sister Tamar. No, it means, we would say lusted, he desired. So please don't make this word prettier than it is. It's an ugly word. It's saying he desired her more than all the other ladies, and so he makes her his queen. What's next? We have now some followers of God. We have at least 2 followers of God who are getting, it just so happens, wink, wink, high up in the kingdom of the world, in the kingdom of Xerxes. Every day, Mordecai comes to hear news of his daughter, / really his cousin, who he raised as a daughter. He cannot go inside because the only one who can go into the harem is a eunuch. No one else is allowed to go in there and visit. So what he can do every day is he comes to the gates of the castle, he comes to the courtyard, and she's probably sending out some eunuchs or servants, and this is the way they're, how's it going? Well, tell Esther I said hi. Have Esther tell me, how's it going? And every day, or how often Mordecai would go, he would exchange, how is she doing? How are things going? And then she becomes queen, and she wins, and now she's in a different place. Now she's in her own place in the castle, but this exchange of information, as much as they can, they keep contact with her. It just so happens that one day, as Mordecai is coming to hear news of how his daughter / cousin, Queen Esther, is doing, that he overhears two of the eunuchs plotting to assassinate King Xerxes. Their names were Bigthan and Teresh. Bigthan and Teresh. Probably guards at the gate, probably guards there. We don't know exactly, but they were somewhere that Mordecai was over to hear them saying, probably, if I was a eunuch and treated that way, you're a conquered person, you're not too happy about this. And they say, we have got to kill King Xerxes. So they're hatching an assassination plot. And it just so happens that Mordecai's in the right place at the right time to overhear their plot. So he summons Queen Esther in this exchange of information. He says, listen, these two guys, Bigthan and Teresh, I overheard them. They're plotting to assassinate your husband, the king. You have got to get information to him about what's going on. So Queen Esther takes information she's given. She gets that information to the king. It's investigated, and it turns out that it just so happens that they really were trying to assassinate King Xerxes. They're brought before the king, they're condemned, and they're put to death. And this incident is written in the book of the Chronicles of the King. The book of the Chronicles of the King is the history of all the amazing things that the king did, or all the amazing things that happened in his kingdom. Think of it as his personal journal. Think of it as his personal bragging book of how great I am and how wonderful my king is. When Esther told the story, she gave credit to Mordecai. She said, you have a servant, you have a worker in your kingdom who overheard this plot, and he told me to tell you about what's happening. So in the book of the Chronicles of the King, it is written down, Mordecai, one of my servants, one of my civil servants, discovered this plot, passed the information along to me. This assassination attempt was stamped out, and the king's life was saved. Now, one of the things that I haven't told you is that up to this point, very few people know that Mordecai and Esther are related. The king doesn't know. Most of the servants do not know. And they definitely do not know that Mordecai is a follower of God. Because they live in the center of this hedonistic world that is opposed to everything that is of God. As the world is opposed to God, God is opposed to the world. And so Mordecai says, keep it under your hat. Don't say you're related to me, and definitely don't say that you are a follower of God. And that's where we stop for today. Because what happens next, it's really going to ramp up. It just so happens. What can we conclude? What should we conclude from God's story as told in the book of Esther? Because God's story as told in the book of Esther It is always about two types of people, the followers of God and the world, the followers of God and those who reject God. And just as is true of Mordecai and Esther, is true for the believer, the Christian, the follower of God today. The follower of God will always be an outsider in this world. You cannot be a friend of the world. You cannot be accepted by the world and be a part of the world and also be a friend of God. The scripture says you have to choose one or the other. And if you choose to be a follower of God, if you choose to be a believer, like Mordecai and Esther, you are going to find yourself in exile. You are going to find yourself in a land that is not yours. 1 Peter 2:11 says, "Beloved, those who are loved by God, those who are the children of God, Christian, believer, follower of God, I urge you as aliens, non-citizens, as strangers, this is not your home, this is a strange land, it's a strange country, it's strange customs, it's strange values, it's strange beliefs from yours, to abstain from fleshly lusts which wage war against the soul." Don't give in to the world. The world is going to try to please all of your senses, your greed, and all of the physical things, but these are temporary and these are wasting away. The follower of God will always be a stranger, an exile, and an alien in this world. The world will always be hostile to the follower of God because of what we believe. Please understand, when we hear in Esther that Mordecai is a Jew, is a follower of God, it has nothing to do with the country that he comes from. It has nothing to do with his ethnicity, and it has everything to do with what he believed and how he lived his life. Because this culture, this time in which we live, is a culture that says what? The more gods, the better. Whatever you do, cover your rear end, cover your bases, and we have a God for anything and everything. And when we conquer another country, if they have a God of something that we hadn't thought of, we might just adopt that as one of our gods. We'll have hundreds of gods. Sometimes they would have thousands of gods. You want to make sure that you have a God for every possible area of life that could come up so that your bases are covered. And then they run into the followers of God, the one true God, the God of history, the only true God who exists, and they say what? There's only one God, there's only one true God, and there's only one true way to live. Do you see the clash that is set up here? We don't accept your other gods because they're false gods. And if you want to worship our God, you must worship our God alone. Who is? The world will always be hostile to the follower of God because of what we believe. Or we could say because of who God is and his character and his nature. Amen? You will never be a friend of the world. You will never be accepted by the world if you want to be a follower of God in his way. This is Jesus speaking to the follower of God, to the Christian, to the believer. If the world hates you, implied, of course it does. If the world hates you and what you stand for and who you serve and who you live for, you should know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of this world, if you were a citizen of this world's belief system, of course the world would love you. Because you think the same and believe the same and live the same. The world loves its own. But because you are not of this world, because you're an alien and a stranger, that your citizenship is not on this side of eternity, but it's on the other side of eternity, because you have a different value and different belief system, the world is going to hate you. But don't worry about it. I chose you out of this world. And I have overcome the world. And he that lives within me will overcome the world. We live in a time on this side of heaven where everything we see, everything we hear, everything we can touch, everything we can experience wants to convince us that the world is in control, that the world is inevitable, and that the world is winning. And Jesus said, fake news. Fake news. I have overcome the world. We know that this life is temporary. We know that eternity is coming. And follower of God, never give in to the lies of this world. It hated me. It's going to hate you. It was opposed to me. It's going to be opposed to you. And yet, what are we called to do? Not be hostile to the world. Not return that hostility. Not return that frustration. But to go what? In love. Love your enemies. The ones who are hostile to you, the one who you go to them and tell them about a God who loves them, about a God who dies for them, about freedom from sin, about a change in life, because that is desperately what they need. Because the God of this world has blinded their eyes, and they don't even realize how messed up they are. Next week, part 3 of God's story as told in the book of Esther. Father, thank you for this reminder today. As much as the world changes, it really doesn't change at all. Its method may change in how it opposes you or how it opposes your values or the things of God, of how it tries to minimize sin and brokenness, of how it chews up individuals and doesn't really care about individuals at all. It only cares about the world.